can't believe I read this. Welcome back to the madness. Please join me down here in the abyss as we delve into the darkest and scariest, the thing that makes grown men jump in the middle of the night. That's right, ladies and gents, we're talking about Catholicism. In today's book, Our Lady of the Forest by David Guterson? Is it Guterson? Guterson! I was right! My brain works. Content advisory for inappropriate relationships between minors and adults, and there should be a warning that minors facing distress at the hands of parents, as well as the use of substances that probably are not legal. And also, my mom found my YouTube channel. So, hi, Mom. She texted me this week and was like, when are you uploading your next video? Shout out to my mom making sure that I am regularly uploading here on YouTube. At least she's supporting my dreams. We're gonna begin with the metadata, everything before opening the page. Cover, title, author, synopsis, you know the rounds if you've seen a couple of these videos, and then at the end I tell you about how well I thought everything was kind of executed. It was written by David Guterson for writing a book called Snow Falling on Cedars, which has won awards and has sold millions of copies. But Our Lady of the Forest has no accolades. There are no awards. There are no brags. This is just a book in his bibliography that somehow managed to land on my TBR list. Brown is our audiobook narrator. She did a phenomenal job. I do feel bad, like, I have pity for some of the scenes that she had to narrate, but other than that, the performance was very well done. It's very rare for an audiobook narrator not to be good. I think there's a couple of books where I didn't like the audiobook narrator, and then there's only one book where I DNF'd because I could not handle the audiobook narrator, and I don't even remember what book that was because I only listened to a little bit of it. So I don't judge books by their covers, although I feel like this cover should be judged, but we'll get to that later. But I do really judge books by their titles. And I still think that Our Lady of the Forest is a really good title. If you're Christian, you probably already know this. But if you're not, let me explain. Actually, if you're Catholic, because I believe this is a Catholic thing. I don't know. Anyways, let me explain if you're not caught up to speed with my man Jesus. So, Our Lady as an epithet is usually going to be referred to Mother Mary, and she is the Mother of God. She is believed to be the person who gave birth to Jesus Christ being like the most important person in Christianity. You might be like rolling your eyes a little bit at this, but there's always that one person that just doesn't know. And so for that one person, here's your lowdown. Okay? But anyways, so Our Lady typically refers to Mother Mary. So Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Lourdes, they're all referring to canonical apparitions of Mother Mary of Christ. And a canonical apparition means that the Catholic Church has vetted this sighting and has concluded that it is real. Whether you believe it's real or not is entirely up to you. I don't care what you think about it, but the important thing here is that the Catholic Church thinks that it's real. Go a step further, in Christian epithets, the word "our" is often used in reference to typically just the holiest figures because it emphasizes the community and the Christian belief that everyone is a child of God. So you might hear Jesus Christ be referred to as our Redeemer, our God. The prayer that a lot of Christian denominations pray is called the Our Father because it starts with Our Father who art in heaven. Like fairly central concept that doesn't have an hour attached to it is the Holy Spirit. Probably because the Holy Spirit is not really personified. For our little theology lesson today, you can understand the Holy Spirit kind of like a bridge that tethers and connects Trinitarian Christians, and almost every Christian is Trinitarian. It connects, Christians to Jesus and God. When you hear Christians say, like, God is present, they're referring to, like, God the Holy Spirit. Because in accordance to the Holy Trinity, God the Holy Spirit, God the Holy Father, and God the Holy Son, they're all one and the same. Theology lesson over. We can close our books. So as a Catholic, seeing a book titled Our Lady of the Forest, you could reasonably extrapolate that this is going to be about a Virgin Mary sighting that happens in a forest. Normal parlance when it comes to that's for Marian sightings. These sightings of the Virgin Mary, they're called Marian sightings. You would use a way more specific word than forest. Forest is too vague because these sites often become places of pilgrimages, so you kind of want to know where to go. And you don't want to confuse Marian sightings by using vague words. But this is a fictional story. It can kind of get away with being vague. I mean, if he had picked a more specific word like Our Lady of Washington, because I think it happens in Washington State, people might actually think that it's a nonfiction book and it's about a real sighting. I don't know. David Guterson doing his research here. I mean, it's not rocket science. You can Google Marian apparitions and you'll notice in the list that almost all of them begin with Our Lady. Out there that don't even do surface level research on the things that they're writing about. Even though I don't really love this novel, I can say that, at least Guterson knew what he was talking about, and I want that on the record. When I'm reading fictional novels that are like about a certain profession or a certain activity or a certain this or a certain that, I don't expect to come out of that book being an expert about like rock climbing or being a doctor. I don't expect that. I do expect one fun fact though. I expect that the author's done enough research that I leave that book knowing at least one fact about being a rock climber. One fact about being a doctor. I only care once you meet the one fun fact bridge, then I'm like, okay, I can deal with it. And some books don't give me a single fun fact about the things that they're talking about. I'm like, do you know what you're talking about? When I don't even learn a single fun fact, I'm still upset about a book I read where the one guy was supposed to be like a pro wrestler and I did not learn a single thing about wrestling. Not a single fact. I don't even know if they're called wrestling rings or wrestling gyms. I don't know. They didn't say. Friend who's really into wrestling. I hope he never sees this video and hears me say that. I think he's just gonna cringe himself into oblivion. Hi, David. I'm Erin. And if you're watching this, please let me know on Instagram who did your cover art. You can find me at LOHer. If you're not David, I have some bad news. I could not find who did the cover art. I ran it through an AI generator, and I can say with assurance that this was not AI art. I didn't think it was AI art. This is a pretty old book, but if I cannot find the artist, then at least I can run it through an AI detector. I think I said generator. I meant to say AI detector. I can run it through an AI detector and at least be like, hey, it's probably not AI art. Was published in 2003. This was like 2 decades ago. AI art was like something that showed up in sci-fi movies, and that's about it. This is a look. This is certainly a look. It isn't my favorite, and here's the thing. I thought perhaps that this is a painting of the Virgin Mary. A very strange painting with the way that it is zoomed in, and her expression seems fairly weird. But I, reverse Google image searched this. I searched famous paintings of the Virgin Mary, and I found some things that looked close, but nothing that was exact. I don't know what this painting... It does look like the zoom in of a classical painting. So, I don't know what it is, what it's doing, and... even though I don't really care much about covers... I don't really love this one. It's weird that, the eyes are looking in different directions. Although I guess in a lot of Mary paintings, I was like, the eyes are kind of consistently weird. And I think that just might be a result of people not knowing how to draw. I don't know. The fact that the title is very small means to me that it wants you to focus on the art of the cover more than the title itself, which means that this should be a pretty important thing to be looking at. If you notice, in most books the title is like fairly big and this is fairly small, so it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be looking at this painting, but who even is this person here? Like, it could also be the main character, but I kind of doubt that. This painting, the style, the colors, it really reminds me of like something that's a little bit post Renaissance, maybe something that's Baroque, but I'm not an art expert. I'm just kind of saying words. That's about the thing that makes it kind of weird. I mean, I appreciate that all the lettering is readable. That's good. I can clearly tell that they used like a brown sort of shadow to create a shadow so that the white popped out. They didn't do it here on a novel, which is really hard, and author of over here, so that's pretty hard to read. But other than that, this is a pretty, I think, mediocre cover, and I could understand why not a lot of people picked this up. There are other covers, and I think there are other more famous covers, but this is the one that I had to look at every time I opened up my audiobook platform, so this is the one that I'm going to be judging it on. Now we're going to look at the novel concept. This is the thing that is on Goodreads that you can read yourself. We're going to read it together, and I'm going to highlight all of the big things, and we're just going to talk about what this book is trying to sell you on as its content. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how I think how accurate this is. Story of a teenage girl who sees a vision of the Virgin Mary, Anna Holmes seems an unlikely candidate for revelation. A 16-year-old runaway, she is an itinerant mushroom picker who lives in a tent. Her past has been hard scrabble. Then, one November afternoon, in a foggy woods in North Fork, Washington, the Virgin comes to her clear as day. Is this delusion, a product of her occasional drug use, or a true calling to God? Gradually, word spreads, and thousands converge upon the already troubled town. For Tom Cross, an embittered logger who's been out of work since his son was paralyzed in a terrible accident, the possibility that Anne's visions are real offers a last chance for him and his son. As Father Collins searches both his own soul and Anne's as Caroline struggles for admirable intentions, as Tom alternates between despair and hope, Our Lady of the Forest combines suspense, grit, humor in a story of faith at a contemporary crossroads. So the big things that we have is teenage girl, Virgin Mary, we get her name. She's the 16-year-old runaway. And then we get a location. The problem is right here. Then we also get our three other characters that are narrators. Where's the last one? Sort of the buzzwords, but right here is this delusion a product of her over occasional drug use or a true calling of God? That is basically the thing that the book wants to talk about. The promise that we're going to get is a dialogue of discussing these Marian apparitions and trying to figure out if it's real or not. Because that is basically anytime anyone claims a Marian apparition, that's the thing that the Catholic Church has to do. They have to figure out if it's real or not, because scammers are everywhere, including trying to scam the Catholic Church. That exists. The Catholic Church has been scammers. You know, not everyone is a good person, and not every church has been good every single moment in history. The Catholic Church has a long history of not being the good guys. Then the other thing that we get here are three other names, and that's Tom Cross, Father Collins, and Caroline. And we get a little bit about them. Tom Cross, the embittered logger, Father Collins, the priest, Caroline, someone who has less than admirable intentions. And so another promise that this blurb is making to us is that we're going to see these three characters, and we're going to see a lot of them. That these three characters and their relationship to Anne is something that is going to be heavily explored in this book. And this last sentence here, this is just like advertised, like an advertisement line that this is what this book is. It's got suspense and grit and humor. It's a contemporary faith story. You know, that's why it's good. I don't think it has any of those things as someone who read this book, but, you know, there are people who 5-starred this book and probably agree with this statement. I am just not one of them. The concept of this novel I rated 5 stars, which means when I was looking at it at Goodreads, I was like, wow, this sounds like a really good book. But now that we're at the novel execution, you will see that I have rated it. How much did I rate it? What was my number? 2 stars. How did we get here? How did we get here? Fun fact, if you go on my Instagram, you can see me posting and being like, this novel is great, and then almost immediately after it, the 2-star review. This novel went downhill fairly quickly. Promised in the synopsis is a very far cry from what we actually got in the novel itself. The synopsis deceives us into thinking that this is about like a cast of corrupted souls, Tom, Caroline, and Father Collins, and they're going to be forever changed by Anne Holmes, regardless if her apparitions are true or not. In a story like this, the validity of the apparition is not important. It's more so how the people react to the apparition. Because even someone who genuinely believes in God, even if this apparition cannot be validated in any way, it can still serve as a sort of spiritual wake-up call and convince someone, even if it is temporary, to be a better person. And we'll get into this, but it doesn't really happen in the novel. No one truly changes. The ones that do change, it all happens off screen, which, why? Why would you have people fundamentally changing off screen? Do you know how long it takes to read books? Most audiobooks are about 6 to 10 hours long. You have, at minimum, 4 extra hours than a movie could ever have to characterize someone, and you decide to do it off screen? The audacity. The point is that the Marion sighting can really change people's lives. You would think that like a redeemed man would be something that Guterson would want to put down in detail. Again, regardless if this Marion sighting can be proved or not, that is not necessarily the important part of this novel. I mean, technically it is. It's the thing that we're promised. But this novel really does spend more time with the characters than it does in the investigations as to whether or not the Marion sighting is true. Alright, welcome to part 2. Beyond page 1, we're actually going to start opening up the book and looking at what's inside. So I read this book in 48 hours. The prose was impressive. That's not a shock. Guterson has an MFA in creative writing. You don't spend that kind of money for an ego boost. Not unless you have cash to burn. Structurally, he's very efficient, and even when I hit the point where I knew I didn't like this book anymore, it wasn't bad enough that I tapped out completely. I usually only DNF a book if I'm really struggling to understand it as a plot level. Only once did I DNF a book that was so dreadfully boring that I simply could not keep going. I appreciated that things always seem to be happening. The plot is always chugging forward at a pretty even pace. I never really got confused or turned around in the plot. The other interesting thing it did, more towards the beginning than it did towards the end, and that I wish that he had continued to do this, is how he used perspective. So we are jumping heads between characters in this book. We jump between Anne, Father Collins, Tom, and Caroline. But when it comes to the actual visions of the Virgin Mary, always in somebody else's head, and so we too have no idea if these apparitions are real or not, because we're never in Anne's head when it happens. Something that I wish they kept doing was a lack of perspective of Anne, because then Anne herself also becomes a mystery. If we never get her interior monologue or dialogue, we never really understand what is going on in her mind, that she is seeing these visages, and I think that would have upped the magic of the sighting itself. You're not Christian. Let me catch you up on why not giving Anne a perspective would have been actually really cool and actually pretty thematic. So in the New Testament, which is the section of the Christian Bible of the stories specifically of Jesus Christ. None of them are actually told from Jesus' perspective. It's always one of his apostles writing it down. The main four are Matt, Mark, Luke, and John. We never get Christ's perspective as written by his own hand. Islam believes that the Quran was revealed and written by Muhammad as dictated by Allah. So in terms of authorship, the Quran can be understood as from Allah's perspective, because Muhammad wrote what was revealed to him without changing a word. That's why in the Quran, you can do different languages, but Arabic is the Arabic version is very, very important because that's the original language it was written in, and therefore closer to the words that Allah revealed to Muhammad. The Bible is not like that. The Bible is written by a lot of men who were documenting their versions of events allegedly as accurate as possible. And there's nothing wrong with this differentiation, but as a result, it does make Jesus a little bit more mysterious because we only ever know what people said about Jesus. We don't have any documents of things that he specifically wrote. We don't have a letter that is like, this was, Dear John, love Jesus. We don't have any of that. Taking this back to Anne, it would make her seem holier in terms of structure if we never got a perspective from her, and it was just the people around her, people who in terms of this allusion towards how the New Testament is structured would take the place of the apostles, the people who were around and during this apparition sighting. But we do eventually get a perspective from Anne. They're not exactly my favorite ones. Honestly, the book starts going downhill in the second half, which is kind of where we do introduce Anne's perspective. So maybe if we never had them, they would have been better. There might have been an Anne perspective at the beginning, but I did read this book a while ago, and I don't remember. So feel free to correct me in the comments. All I'm going to say is that I thought it would have been a really cool allusion to the New Testament had it been structured if Anne never got a perspective. Nitpick, and it's not enough for me to dock a star in the plot section. It was just something that I thought of that could have been cool and thematic that I think was a missed opportunity. And I don't have anywhere else to say it but to the Void and, 19 tendrils that are subscribed to me. Which, by the way, if you'd love to be a part of the Void in which I scream at, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you here. Lumpy would love to have you here. So I said in prose that I read this book under 48 hours, and it's partially because the plot was interesting enough that I wanted to see it followed through, but it's by no means the best plot around. The story is Anne Holmes. She receives this vision from allegedly Mother Mary in a forest when she's mushroom picking, and we begin where she's exploring these visions for the first time to the Catholic Church investigating to confirm that it's an actual sighting, and then ultimately the death of Anne after she succumbs to an illness. I don't remember what she's sick with, but I know that she's given medication for it, and we'll circle back to that. We do have what seems like one miracle. Anne, through the Virgin Mary, through God, is able to cure a woman of her cigarette addiction and some warts on her body. That's not enough to be considered a saint, alright? So in terms of miracles, that's still not enough to be a saint. You need 2 miracles to be a saint. To be considered a blessed, you only need 1 miracle. So if they could verify, if the Catholic Church wanted to verify that woman was actually cured of her cigarette addiction and was actually cured of her works, Anne Holmes would be considered Blessed Anne Holmes. Now, common parlance over the word miracle is very romantic and vague, but the Catholic Church is fairly specific. The too long don't care is that it's an act that science cannot explain. A lot of miracles canonized by the Church are usually the cure of some sort of debilitating disease. And I know what you're thinking, how often can, science not explain the cure of a debilitating disease? I mean, I know someone in my life that, doctors still don't understand how he got off the operating table alive. The logic is that they just did good work, but sometimes they're like, man, the survival rate was very low, and somehow he pulled through, and that it doesn't even make sense to us, and, that could be investigated and might be an act of God. Who knows? There's probably a reason why there's not a lot of modern miracles, is because science can explain a lot of cures to debilitating diseases. Anyways, so Anne's miracle of the cure of nicotine addiction, the warts, it could be reasonably a miracle. A woman would have to have a medical examination to prove without a shadow of a doubt that there's no scientific explanation. In terms of agency, things happen to Anne. Anne never does anything. She's always put in positions to react to events and sometimes just endure unpleasant things, but she's never really acting on her own accord. It never feels like Anne is going out and doing something. She's always talking about the things that she wants to do, namely build a church to Mother Mary, but she's not very active beyond going to the vision site, so the place where she saw the visions, and then going back to her, tent. Her only true active agency, which is where I want to bang my head on the tabernacle, is that Anne is ill in a physical sense. I can't remember what she's sick with. Honestly, they might not even name it, but she is sick, and she gets worse every day, and not a single adult takes her to the hospital. And all of the adults just respect her wish not to go to the hospital. What? That's literally insane. I get that healthcare in America is a nightmare, but this is a fictional book, and you're telling me out of thousands of people around that a single adult was willing to drive this girl against her will to a hospital so she doesn't die? The most unbelievable part of this whole story, every adult in this story is dumb. Quite literally inching closer to death every waking moment, but everyone just lets her get worse. What a nightmare. To round out our discussion about the plot, I will add that one of the things that immediately disqualifies the Virgin Mary sighting is drug use, and Anne is on a medication when taken in high doses causes hallucinations, and I believe it's understood that Anne died from whatever she was sick with mixed with potentially an overdose. Adults watched and let this happen to a teenager. A teenager! Her final moments with Anne are in her perspective, in which she does seem to see the Mother Mary, but we'll never know if that was the drugs. As far as the Catholic Church is concerned, it cannot be canonized because the presence of drugs. In conclusion, the plot is fairly simple and interesting enough. There's just a lot of parts that I didn't jive with, and things that didn't make sense, and I didn't like that Anne never seemed to do anything. Things just happened to her. So, in a book where the plot is relatively simple, the meat of the novel is more about what all of the characters are doing. As I was writing this script, the plot section was really hard because a lot of my gripes are specifically with the character development, which belongs in this section. Let me explain the character development of everybody in this novel. That's right, baby. There is none. Oh, I can't believe I read this. Alright, so that's a lie, technically. Tom becomes a better person, but it happens off screen. For me, it's horror movie rules. If you don't see a body, they aren't dead. If you don't see them become a better person, they don't. Father Collins is a gross man that has gross thoughts about Anne Holmes. The worst part is that it wasn't even interesting. I read it and I was like, oh, of course. Father Collins, the Catholic priest, is giving Lolita vibes. What other vice could an author give to a priest? I get it happens in real life. I'm not opposed to it in fiction, but God, it's just annoying that anytime anyone wants to give a priest advice, it's the same thing. It's the same vice. And I just do something with it. Do something interesting. Stop being so predictable. Oh my God. Shout out to the video game Faith, where the priests, the bad things that they do is that they are gunning down demons. I love that those priests' problem is that they are constantly committing gratuitous violence. If you're like I said, if you're gonna do something with a priest, even if you're gonna do something like this, a priest that has inappropriate thoughts like this, make it interesting, because this simply wasn't. I just kind of rolled my eyes and was like, of course. It's not just Father Collins, though. Honestly, it would, like, if it was just Father Collins, maybe I would have felt a little bit better about it. I don't know. It was weird that everyone who thought Anne, who was 16, is very sexy. Anne is like the sexiest person in this town, and it is the most uncomfortable thing. Anne is on his way. He is in your balls. He is coming for your ankles. Comfortable, and what makes it more uncomfortable is that Guterson really wasn't doing anything thematically with how hypersexualized Anne is. I'm not really opposed to having uncomfortable topics and representations in books. What I don't like is when you're not doing anything with it. Like, if you're going to have this sort of plot point, you need to be doing something with it, and it doesn't really seem like he was. It was just there and treated like it was normal, which makes me think that he thinks that thinking about teenagers like this is normal, and I don't think David Guterson actually believes that. I just think this is something that kind of accidentally happened, and this is probably the reason why this ain't got no awards. Ever experienced SA, or SA is a triggering topic for you, do not read this book. This book does not handle it well, and it could very well trigger you. I could never recommend this to anyone who has gone through SA. I would be cruel and unusual punishment for me to do that. Graphic scene, but it's not Anne and the Priest, it's her and her stepfather, and I started like skipping through it because I'm listening to this on audiobook, which to listen to that on audiobook, way worse, and I was like, I don't want to hear this. We're not doing anything thematically with this. This is just gross and here for the sake of tragedy, and I don't like it. Video about Bright Young Woman, I talked about how someone on TikTok said that SA is misrepresented in media because they focus too much on the act itself and not so much on the aftermath. And in terms of Our Lady of the Forest, it definitely focuses too much on the act and not so much the aftermath. I don't know why they needed to give us the graphic as a scene as they did. It was the worst. So bad that I blocked it out of my conscience, and I was like, oh, like, the vibes, the Lolita vibes are very minor as I was writing the script, and then I was like, oh, right, there's the stepfather scene, and I was like, never mind. Graphic uncomfortableness. Ugh. The three characters that we got in the synopsis, she's the easiest of the trio. She's just greedy and wants money out of this. She attaches herself to Anne and spends around collection buckets and plans to get out of Dodgeball City with the money. I honestly don't think she ever grows as a person. I think her bones are made of pyrite through and through. And so I ask you, what is the point of her character? Tom is the hardest one for me. I mean, I thought Father Collins was going to be bad, but at least, like, Father Collins never acts on his vices. Tom hates his son. I think Tom is the reason why his son is disabled. And he's this, like, all-around terrible drunk, out-of-work logger. He's got a terrible mouth, and is just the worst guy at any given time. And he spends a lot of time in confession, and let me tell you, he needs to spend a lot more time in confession. In fact, I think that at the church in North Fork, which this town takes place, I think they need to get a special confessional booth and just label it Tom's, because he honestly deserves it. Tom becomes like a better dude during a time skip, and I don't care because it basically didn't happen. That's such a cop out. I want to see him grow. I don't want to be told about it. What disappointed me most is that it doesn't matter if the apparitions are real or not. Like, the real juice of the story is the way that a perceived act of faith can change people's lives for the better. The one guy who does improve, it's off screen. It makes me ask, what is the point of this novel if the only thing that changes from the first to the last page is that a 16-year-old dies due to thousands upon thousands of negligent adults? There isn't much to say about the dialogue here. I did love Caroline. She's the greedy swindler. She really overuses, like, religious language in order to make Anne and this act seem more holier in an attempt to get more money out of people. She really does not buy in to Anne's Marian apparitions. She doesn't believe them, but she does see that there is profit in it, and so she will pretend for the sake of the gold. I do want to talk about Tom's language. Tom has a terrible mouth, and there are some slurs thrown around. Now, I have a really hard rule that I really don't tolerate misused slurs. In my perfect world, I think that, like, there is really seldom a reason to have slurs in books, but, like, that is just my opinion. And I understand why characters, or why authors do choose to have characters say slurs, because it is something that happens in real life. There are people who say them because they think it makes them look cool. There are people who say them because they have the right to say them. There are people who say them because they are entitled and think they have the right to say them when they don't. So that is something that happens in real life, and I think that it's reasonable that you want to represent what happens in real life in books of fiction. So I tolerate slurs when it is clearly a character moment and not the author just being ignorant. And in this case, despite the fact that, I didn't really love this book, the usage of foul language, like, it didn't come off as author ignorance. It really felt like it was a character choice of Tom. And, if foul language is a non-starter for you, you probably would want to give this book a pass. Everyone's got different opinions about it, and you are entitled to keep those opinions. I covered Children's Bible. We'll cover this again because there's a lot of slurs in that one that I did not disagree with the presence of it because it was about children. There was just one, it was used twice, and it really didn't it felt more aggressive than the other one. So we'll come back to the idea of misused slurs when we talk about children's Bibles, because I think a children's Bible had a couple of misused slurs. Alright, so the plot isn't plotting. The characters really aren't all that interesting, despite some cool setup. But what cannot be denied about Our Lady of the Forest is that Guterson did his research and did an outstanding and phenomenal job in creating the atmosphere. All of his MFA knowledge is clearly poured into creating this bygone logging town where this apparition takes place, as well as the nuance of the Catholic Church's involvement and its history. The lore is loring. The setting feels real, and the usage of perspective gives Anne often a sense of mystery, since no one genuinely knows if these apparitions are real or not. If you go look at the reviews, there's 5-star reviews that are this book was deep and vivid and haunting. I got a lot out of the reading experience, which honestly I'm jealous of. I don't love hating books. I don't go into this thinking that I'm gonna have a bad time and then I'm gonna have a rant review. Part of the experience this book has 5-star reviews, and what people are getting out of it is the atmosphere created by the lore and the setting. Thematically, there's a lot of stuff introduced at the beginning and it's cool, but nothing ever comes to fruition. So the sort of thematic atmosphere, any sort of emotion that is supposed to be being pulled throughout the entire story, we don't really have anything of that, because there's a lot of setup but really no payoff. But the town was vivid, and the Marian apparition stuff was well done. All of that was really well done. I can really tell that the research of this novel, a lot went into it, and I appreciate that. Hello. It's me. It's the section you've been waiting for. You've been out there in the void, ready to watch Jezebel get eaten by the dogs of my slanderous rage. I think to say this book did not have great themes would be a much kinder thing to say, because in fact, the themes are not bad, they just aren't. In my opinion, this book fails to say anything genuine or meaningful. All of the characters are exactly who you think they are, and they are the exact same by the end of the novel. The priest, Grady con woman, abusive, out-of-work dad. They resolve in predictable and disappointing ways. And given how much of this book seems to want to talk about redemption and community and togetherness, none of the main characters genuinely change in any really meaningful way, and all of the work that the theme has tried to set up fizzles out. Irrelevancy. I really wanted this book to have something to actually say about redemption, but in all honesty, this book failed to say anything about anything. Even asking for everyone to make a sudden change, because we all know that that's unrealistic. but the only change, again, happens off screen. That's insulting. Even if I were to give this book a fighting chance and think maybe it's about how genuine acts of faith are corrupted by man, there's still nothing in the book to actually support that argument. I think an event like this could happen in real life because we can't really prove there's any higher power moving us through a storyline with thematic intention. Shit just happens, and there's not always a moral or a meaning to the things that happen to us. All the while, that's not very entertaining. Memoirs are arranged to have a theme present. Biographies and autobiographies are about people who had interesting lives or did interesting things. Autofiction allows us to sort of fictionalize our life to make it seem like there is more narrative cohesion to the real life events of our lives. The struggle of nonfiction is, how do you make real life entertaining? The answer is often to make shit up and stretch the truth, but that's a different conversation for a different day. All of this is to say is that if this book was nonfiction, like if it was a real event that actually happened, I would have believed it more, because this is how real people act. No one has to change for the better. There's no powers at play that force anyone to do anything. But this is a fictional book, and the worst thing a book of fiction could do is unintentionally have nothing to say because it is too closely replicating real life. There's people who disagree with me. 30% of people who read this book thought it was a deep and great moving novel. I'm happy that you found meaning out of this book. I just didn't, and I hope you're living your best life. I sound like I'm being sarcastic. I'm not. Every book is somebody's favorite book, and I think that is the best part about art. Now that we've torn this book to shreds, it's time to head on over to part 3, Opinions Aplenty, to give you an itemized list of everything I just ranted about for your ease of reference. The prose is very good. Like I said, David Guterson has an MFA in creative writing. It very much shows. He knows how to structure a novel. Even though I didn't like this book, I read it in less than 48 hours. The book is very well researched. I felt like everything was fairly believable. I felt like I learned things. I felt like this could have actually happened. And the setting also felt very real. The atmosphere of the Pacific Northwest feels fairly spot on. Our sort of three sinners, Collins, Tom, and Caroline, their setups were interesting. They were like incredibly flawed individuals interacting with a girl who might have seen Mary. But in the end, we don't really do anything with these characters, and the only person to change is Tom, and that happens off screen. And I don't even remember how he changes for the better. I'm going to be honest, I don't really recall. So that part just didn't work for me, because I was like, okay, technically no one has to change, right? You could say something like that, but like, what is the point of the story then? What is the point? The representation of sexuality is a solid no. With how many people found a 16-year-old very sexy, and I did not like the bit about the stepdad. It was weird from start to finish. The themes, anything that was established in the first part of the novel, had no follow-through at the end. The only change we really see, honestly, is the fact that Anne dies at the end. That's the only change in this story, is that she's dead at the end. No agency except in her refusal to go to a hospital. The adults are incompetent beyond a sense of realism. That was a solid no for me. Even though this, like I said, like I had believed that this book would happen. I guess in real life, I could see a bunch of adults just like not taking this girl to a hospital, but like at the same time, every single adult? Everyone? No, there's one sweet little old lady grandma who went out there that would have taken her to the hospital. Okay, welcome to Case Study. If you want to become a better writer, the best thing you can do is case study novels that broadly do something successful that you might want to do yourself. It's kind of like using a photo reference for drawing a piece of art. So we're going to talk about what you could get out of this book. I am recommending this book more as a cautionary tale. And look, I get it. No book wants to be recommended for you to look at what not to do. but I think these are some of the most important books to study because sometimes it's easier to understand how not to do something than how to do something. I'm sorry, Guterson, about recommending it this way, but in terms of education, I find that this book is fairly priceless, so at least there's that. The Forest is well researched. I don't know if Guterson is Catholic, but even so, it's clearly a level of love and dedication was put into the Catholic aspects of this novel. So if you're wanting to case study a book where the non-fictional elements are well researched because you really want to know what that looks like, I would read this book. If you want a cautionary tale about what a book looks like that doesn't follow through with character arcs, then I would have you read this book. If you're unsure if the sexuality in your novel comes off as creepy, you can read this book and use it as a comparison to your own. The prose of this book is very good. The plot kept me hooked despite the fact I didn't like it, so at the very least, it's a good reference for good prose. Again, Guterson has an MFA. We shouldn't be that surprised that the prose itself is very honed. This was taught in university. You'd receive your mimicry assignment. A mimicry assignment is when you're emulating the style of the book that you've just read, using the tools the author employed to create something of your own. So here is your mimicry assignment. If this was taught in class, I would want you to write about a character going through something that cannot be readily explained. It could be a paranormal event, for example, or perhaps like a 5-year-old experiencing something for the first time. Whatever it is, I don't want you to write it from the perspective of the person who is having the unexplained event, but the people around them. Have the people who weren't there, maybe heard it secondhand, or were there and saw nothing, give the account of the event, plus how they feel about the person who experiences it. The final part is that before you sit down to write your story, explain the event on a sticky note. The alien came down, were caused by accidentally taking a drug. God is real and her name is Brittany. The 5-year-old has never seen a unicycle before. You don't need to tell us in the story what the actual unexplained event is, but you have to write it down so that you can better write around it. I'm sure that Guterson, before writing this novel, decided whether or not the apparition was real or not. And he's never going to tell us. He doesn't have to. But based on the writing, it does read like he at least wrote it down whether or not he decided out of character or in the meta if it was real or not. It's time to indulge me. Well, welcome to Tag Town. I love Goodreads tags, but my Goodreads tags are not helpful. This is what I had tagged this book under. I tagged it under Uncomfortable Obsession because Father Collins is very sus about his feelings for Anne. It's very weird, and I don't like it. We also tagged as Men Writing Women because unfortunately the way Anne is written feels very much like that. She's 16 and yet she is the born sexy yesterday trope, and that's weird. Tag this as Johnny Truant Core. Johnny Truant Core is for when there is thematic madness, unreliable narrators, you can't trust what's being said. Live, Laugh, Lobotomy is a tag that I use specifically for when I want to give myself a lobotomy for how insane that this plot was, the choices that it made. I tagged this as Fragile Men energy, especially for Tom. Tom is the guy that Kyle Prue is trying to piss off. Religion-y was one of the tags because there's a lot of Catholicism in the book. It's not like in your face, like trying to evangelize you. It's fairly neutral in like an uplifting and a criticizing way of a religion. Tag this under your allies. Choose them wisely because Anne can't trust nobody in this town. Everyone is out for her in some way, and it's really sad watching her get manipulated. And then finally, this tag was created because of this book, which is CPS is on the way, because good God, why did nobody call social services? Why did no one call the police? Why did no one take her to the hospital? What? I rated this book 2 stars, so I'm not really sure if I could recommend this book, but this book does have an audience. This is somebody's favorite book. So if you're a fan of anything on the following of this list, you might actually like this book. Like books that include Catholicism, small towns, dubious morality, contemporary novels, philosophy on the nature of Catholicism's God, Marian sightings, terrible people doing terrible things, and the Pacific Northwest. Art is subjective, and any attempt to assert any form of objectivity onto art is kind of a waste of time. You can't even say that, like, good grammar is a staple for books because there are genres where fragmentation is very important and there are audiences for those genres. I think everyone wants to have high quality novels. We just all have drastically different thresholds for what we consider a low and a high quality novel. So whether you loved this book that it is a hill that you're willing to die on, or hated it with a passion of 1,000 suns, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your interpretations. That is the end of today's episode. The madness has ended. You can go in peace, and I will see you next time when we jump back into the void to talk about another book.